This story is about a 10-year-old young lady named Pollyanna. Her parents died, and she moved to her wealthy but very strict Aunt Polly, who lived in Beldingsville, Vermont. Pollyanna has got a talent to be glad under any circumstances. Despite her sad attic room and the coldness of her aunt, this girl was always glad and tried to share this gladness with Nancy, Miss Polly's hired girl.
For the land's sake, Miss Pollyanna, what a scare you did give me.
Scare? Oh, I'm so sorry. But you mustn't really ever get scared about me, Nancy. Father and the ladies' aide used to do it too, till they found I always came back all right. I think I'm glad after all that you did get scared. A little. 'Cause then you came after me.
Poor little lamb. And you must be hungry too. I am afraid you have bread and milk in the kitchen with me. Your aunt didn't like it, because you didn't come down to supper, you know. I'm sorry about the bread and milk. I am.
Oh, I am not. I'm glad.
Glad? Why?
Why, I like bread and milk, and I'd like to eat with you. I don't see any trouble about being glad about that.
You don't seem to see any trouble being glad about everything.
Well, that's the game, you know, anyway.
The game?
Yes, the Just Being Glad game. Father taught it to me, and it's lovely. We've played it always, ever since I was a little girl. I taught the ladies' aid, and they played it. Some of them.
What is it? I'm not much on games.
We began it on some crutches that came in a missionary barrel.
Crutches?
Yes, you see, I'd wanted a doll, and Father had written them so. But when the barrel came, the lady wrote that there hadn't any dolls come in, but the little crutches had. So she sent them instead the doll, and that's when we began it.
Well, I must say I can't see any game about that.
Oh yes, the game was to just find something about everything to be glad about, no matter what it was.
Well, goodness me, I can't see anything to be glad about. Getting a pair of crutches when you wanted a doll.
There is, but I couldn't see it at first. Father had to tell it to me.
Well, then suppose you tell me.
Just be glad because you don't need them. You see, it's just as easy, when you know how.
Next morning, Miss Polly Harrington was waiting for Pollyanna in the living room for breakfast. She was going to tell her niece about her new duties. But Pollyanna's directness and just being glad surprised and even shocked Miss Polly.
Aunt Polly, what a wonderful morning, isn't it? I'm so glad I'm living with you now.
Good morning, Pollyanna. Did you have your supper yesterday, Pollyanna?
Yes, Aunt Polly.
I am very sorry, Pollyanna, but I had to send you into the kitchen to eat bread and milk.
But I was real glad you did it, Aunt Polly. I like bread and milk, and Nancy too. You mustn't feel bad about that one bit. I told Nancy how Father said.
Well, Pollyanna, never mind now what your father said.
Why, Aunt Polly? You mean...
There is one thing that you should remember, and that is, I do not care to have you keep talking of your father to me. Nancy, where did those flies come from?
I don't know, ma'am. There wasn't one in the kitchen.
I think maybe they're my flies, Aunt Polly. There were lots of them this morning, having a beautiful time upstairs.
Yours? What do you mean? Where did they come from?
Why, Aunt Polly, they came from out of doors, of course, through the windows. I saw some of them come in.
You saw them? You mean you raised those windows without any screens? Flies, Pollyanna, are not only unclean and annoying, but very dangerous to health. After breakfast, I will give you a little pamphlet on this matter to read.
To read? Oh, thank you, Aunt Polly. I love to read. I'm very glad.
What a most extraordinary child. She is always glad.
Once a week, usually on Thursday afternoons, Pollyanna visited Mrs. Snow. Miss Polly Harrington always sent something to her. Mrs. Snow was a poor sick woman who was always laying in bed and complaining that her life had no meaning.
How do you do, Mrs. Snow?
Very poorly, thank you.
Aunt Polly says she hopes you are comfortable today, and she sent you something.
Very well, thank you. Your aunt is very kind, of course, but my appetite isn't very good this morning.
But now, I want you to guess what I've brought you.
Well, what is it?
Guess, what do you want?
I don't want anything.
If you did want something, what would it be?
Well, of course there's lamp broth.
I've got it.
But that's what I didn't want. It was chicken I wanted.
Oh, I've got that too.
Both of them?
Yes, and Carl's food jelly. So Nancy and I fixed it. Oh, of course, there's only a little of each, but there's some of all of them. I'm so glad you did want chicken. Maybe tomorrow you will want some lamb broth, so I will leave them all.
Oh, thank you, dear.
There, I almost forgot. But I've thought it up, Mrs. Snow. What you can be glad about?
Glad about? What do you mean?
Why, I told you I would. Don't you remember? You asked me to tell you something to be glad about, even though you did have to lie here abed all day.
Oh, that... Yes, I remember that.
It was hard. Honest to true that I couldn't think of anything for a while. Then I got it.
Did you really? Well, what is it?
I thought how glad you could be that other folks weren't like you, all sick in bed like this, you know.
Well, really.
And now I'll tell you the game. It will be just lovely for you to play. You see, it's like this.
New Pollyanna's friend, Dr. Chilton, noticed that she had taught not only Mrs. Snow to play her Just Being Glad game. Thanks to this lovely and always joyful girl, many people of the town had learned to enjoy life and be glad, including Mr. Pendleton, who previously had used to be moody and mysterious old man.
I've heard a lot about you, Pollyanna. You have managed to liven up Mrs. Snow and my some other sad patients. What is your secret?
It's not a secret. I just prefer being glad to being sad. My father taught me.
I prescribed you for a patient and he sent me for you. It's Mr. John Pendleton. He would like to see you today, if you don't mind. Will you come?
I'd love to. How do you do, Mr. Pendleton? I'm glad to see you. Today you look better.
Thank you. It's only due to you. Today I have to say you something very important. Pollyanna, how would you like to come and live with me?
I thought you didn't like to have folks round.
Oh, but that was before you taught me to play that wonderful game of yours. I want you, little girl, to help me play it. Will you come? I know that a woman's hand and heart or a child's presence can make a home instead the house, Pollyanna. And I have not had either. Now, will you come, my dear?
Mr. Pendleton, I can't, I can't. I'm Aunt Polly's. You don't know how good she's been to me. And I think really sometimes she's beginning to be glad about things, lots of things. And she never used to be. Oh, Mr. Pendleton, I couldn't leave Aunt Polly, now.
No, Pollyanna, I see. You couldn't leave her now. I won't ask you again.
Oh, but there's the very gladdest thing you can do. Truly there is.
Not for me, Pollyanna.
Yes, sir, for you. You said it. You said only a woman's hand and heart or a child's presence could make a home. And I can get it for you. A child's presence. Not me, but another one. Jimmy.
Who?
Jimmy Bean. He's the child's presence, And he'll be so glad to be it. I had to tell him last week that even my lady's aide out west wouldn't take him, and he was so disappointed. But now, when he hears of this, he'll be so glad.
Will he? Well, I won't. Pollyanna, this is nonsense.
You don't mean you won't take him?
I certainly do mean just that.
Maybe you think a nice little boy wouldn't be better than that old dead skeleton you keep somewhere, but I think it would.
Skeleton?
Yes, Nancy said you had one in your closet, somewhere.
Pollyanna, I suspect you are right. In fact, I know that a nice little boy would be far better than my skeleton in the closet. Only, we don't always want to make the exchange. However, tell me a little more about this nice little boy.
And I'm so glad, and I'm sure you like him. I do so want Jimmy Bean to have a home, and folks that care,
And Pollyanna told Mr. Pendleton everything she knew about this orphan boy Jimmy Bean. The man agreed to meet Jimmy. Very soon, Mr. Pendleton adopted the boy and made him his heir.
Hi, my name is Jimmy Bean, or Jimmy Bean Pendleton now. Sometimes I forget that I've got a new name. Looking around this town, you may think that these folks have always been glad, but that isn't true. It wasn't long ago that this town was suffering very much. It had a terrible lack of gladness. Nobody knew anything about how to be glad. Not Mrs. Snow, not Nancy, nor Mr. Pendleton, and particularly not Miss Polly Harrington. Everything changed when Pollyanna came. She taught all of us to find something to feel happy and glad about, even when it was very difficult. And now we hope we managed to teach you a little bit. Play this wonderful game every time you suffer and always be glad.
The